I smiled and asked, "What's the dress code for your wedding?" My stepdaughter looked up from her phone, let out a little laugh, and said, "You don't need one." I frowned, thinking she was joking. Then she added, "You're not invited." Someone at the table snorted, someone else chuckled. Even worse, nobody looked surprised. My husband stared down at his mashed potatoes like they suddenly required his full attention. I smiled because I knew if I opened my mouth, I'd cry. That was last October, in our favorite Italian restaurant on Main Street in Carmel, Indiana. Less than 24 hours earlier, I'd paid $11,200 for Olivia's dream wedding gown. Funny how life works. Sometimes the receipt is still warm in your purse when somebody reminds you exactly where you stand. People ask me all the time why I stayed so calm. The truth? I wasn't calm. I was 56 years old, sitting across from a family I'd spent 8 years trying to become part of. And for one long second, I honestly couldn't breathe. But I learned something after losing my first husband to pancreatic cancer. Not every battle is won by speaking first. Sometimes you survive by saying nothing at all. My name is Claire Bennett. Before I married Mark, I'd spent nearly 14 years alone. My first husband, David, and I had been married 22 years. We weren't rich, we weren't glamorous, we were the kind of couple who argued over whose turn it was to buy birdseed and considered Costco a fun Saturday date. When David died, half the color disappeared from my world. I sold the house we'd shared, downsized to a condo in Carmel, invested the proceeds carefully, and eventually retired from my job as a high school guidance counselor. Life became quieter, not happier. Just quieter. Then I met Mark. He owned a small HVAC company outside Indianapolis. He was kind, patient. He laughed with his whole face. Most importantly, he understood grief because he'd buried his wife years before. Neither of us was looking for fireworks. We were looking for peace. When we married, I never expected his daughter Olivia to call me Mom. That wasn't my place. Her mother deserved that title forever. I only hoped that someday she'd think of me as family. Looking back, maybe I confused generosity with belonging. Whenever Olivia needed help, I was there. College graduation. I drove 3 hours with homemade lasagna because she'd mentioned missing real food. Her first apartment? I spent an entire weekend assembling IKEA furniture while she laughed every time I mispronounced the Swedish names. Her first real interview? We practiced questions over coffee at a Panera until she finally stopped saying every other sentence. When she cried after her first serious breakup, she called me, not her father, me. I drove over with chocolate chip cookies that were still warm from the oven. Those memories mattered to me, apparently not to her. About 10 months before the wedding, Olivia announced her engagement to Ryan Cooper. Ryan was exactly the kind of young man every parent hopes their child finds: steady, respectful, civil engineer. The sort of guy who still held doors open because it never occurred to him not to. Their wedding plans started out reasonable. Then social media happened. Suddenly, every conversation included words like luxury, statement piece, and once-in-a-lifetime aesthetic. The guest list doubled, the flowers doubled, the budget tripled. One evening after Olivia left our house, I found Mark sitting alone on the back deck. He was staring at a spreadsheet on his laptop. "You okay?" I asked. He closed it so quickly it almost made me laugh. "Business stuff. You've been saying business stuff for weeks." He rubbed his forehead. "The company's had a slow year." "How slow?" He forced a smile. "I'll handle it." That became his favorite sentence. I'll handle it. I believed him. Not because I was naive, because after 8 years of marriage, I trusted him. A few weeks later, I accidentally overheard Mark on the phone in the garage. No, I need another month. Silence. I said another month. When he came inside, I asked if everything was all right. He kissed my forehead. Just cash flow. That was it. I didn't push. His business account had always been separate from our household finances. He'd insisted on that from the beginning. Work stays at work, he'd always say. It never bothered me, until it did. The first clue came from the wedding florist. She called while I was grocery shopping at Kroger. I hate bothering you, she said. We still haven't received the second payment. I think you have the wrong number. No, Mrs. Bennett. Mr. Bennett told us to contact you if there were any issues. I stood there between the apples and the pumpkins, feeling my stomach tighten. When I got home, Mark admitted the truth. Business wasn't just slow. Several commercial clients had delayed payments, leaving the company squeezed for cash. I'll catch up, he promised. I just need a little time. What about Olivia's wedding? He sighed. I don't want her worrying. Neither did I. So I quietly paid the florist, then the photographer, then the rehearsal dinner deposit. Each time I told myself it was temporary. Mark would reimburse me once things improved. After all, this wasn't really about money. It was about helping family. The biggest purchase came 3 weeks before that dinner. Olivia found a custom gown at an exclusive boutique in downtown Indianapolis. She looked absolutely radiant. Even Elaine Porter, the boutique owner, wiped away a tear. Olivia twirled in front of the mirror. This is the one. Then reality arrived. The total came to $11,200. The room fell silent. Mark's face lost all its color. Ryan looked uncomfortable. Olivia's smile faded. Without thinking, I reached into my purse. I've got it. Olivia threw her arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe. Thank you. It was probably the warmest hug she'd ever given me. I remember thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe this is the moment she finally sees me as family. Elaine walked me to the register afterward. Quietly, away from everyone else. You're doing a very generous thing, she said. I hope so. She looked at me for a long moment before handing me the contract. Keep this copy, and if you ever have questions about anything, you call me directly. I slipped it into my purse without reading every page. I wish I had. The next evening, I asked one simple question. What should I wear to the wedding? Olivia laughed. You don't need one. I smiled politely. What do you mean? She leaned back in her chair and shrugged. You're not invited. Nobody corrected her. Nobody looked shocked. Mark cleared his throat. Let's not make tonight awkward. That sentence hurt almost as much as Olivia's. I stood, picked up my purse, told everyone to enjoy dessert, then walked out into the cool Indiana night. I sat inside my car for nearly 15 minutes. I cried harder than I had in years. 3 different times, I picked up my phone to call Olivia. 3 different times, I put it back down. Finally, I found Elaine's number. She answered on the second ring. Claire? I couldn't speak. She waited. Then she asked quietly, Are you absolutely sure? I closed my eyes. Yes. There was another long silence. Then Elaine simply said, All right. The next morning, she began following the boutique contract exactly as written. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Olivia's voice. You don't need one. Not because she hadn't invited me. That part hurt, of course. But what kept replaying was how natural it sounded. There wasn't any hesitation, no guilt, no awkwardness. She hadn't lashed out in anger. She'd simply told me where I belonged. Outside the family. Around 5:30 the next morning, I gave up on sleep, put on a sweatshirt, and drove to Gray Road Coffee. The young woman behind the counter smiled. The usual, Claire. I smiled back. Please. She handed me my large, dark roast and one of those little blueberry muffins that somehow always taste better on difficult mornings. Everything okay? I almost laughed. Isn't that funny? Sometimes strangers ask the question the people closest to you never think to ask. I'm getting there, I said. She nodded like she understood. Maybe she did. By the time I got home, Mark was already dressed for work. He kissed my cheek, as if nothing unusual had happened. You left pretty quickly last night. I did. He poured himself coffee. Olivia was just stressed. I stared at him. Is that what we're calling it? He sighed. You know how weddings are. No, I said quietly. Actually, I don't. He looked uncomfortable. I'll talk to her. When? He shrugged. Soon. That word irritated me almost as much as the night before. Soon, later, eventually. Words people use when they have no intention of doing anything. Mark picked up his travel mug. I love you. I know. He waited, probably expecting me to say it back. Instead, I watched him leave through the garage door. The house became wonderfully quiet. Around 9, my phone rang. Elaine, good morning, Claire. I've been thinking all night. I figured. I don't want to do something I'll regret. You mean canceling the gown? I hesitated. I don't even know exactly what I'm doing. Elaine was quiet for a moment. Then she switched into the calm, matter-of-fact tone of someone who had spent 30 years explaining contracts to emotional brides. Claire, let me explain something. I'm listening. The dress hasn't been delivered. I know. It also hasn't legally transferred ownership. I frowned. I paid for it. You paid the purchase price. Isn't that the same thing? Not yet. She explained that every custom gown at her boutique followed the same agreement. Before pickup, the bride had to attend the final fitting, approve the alterations, sign acceptance paperwork, and complete delivery. Until that happened, the gown legally remained the boutique's property. If a customer changes her mind before delivery, Elaine said, the contract tells us exactly how to handle it. So I'm not taking anything away from Olivia. No, Elaine's voice softened. You're simply choosing not to complete a purchase. I let that sink in. There was a surprising difference. One felt like revenge. The other felt like a boundary. I still feel awful. I'd be worried if you didn't. For the next 3 days, I kept waiting for someone to call. Olivia didn't. Mark didn't. Nobody apologized. Life simply moved on, at least for them. For me, something had quietly shifted. For years, whenever there was a problem, I'd solved it, without being asked, without expecting recognition. Now, I stopped. That was all. When the florist emailed asking about the remaining balance, I didn't reply. When the transportation company called regarding the shuttle buses, I let it go to voicemail. When the makeup artist emailed asking where to send the final invoice, I archived it, not out of spite, because for the first time I realized those weren't my responsibilities. They never had been. Instead of spending my afternoons fixing wedding problems, I started doing things I'd forgotten I enjoyed. I met my friend Linda for lunch at Muldoon's. We'd taught in the same school district for nearly 20 years. She looked at me across the table. You seem different. Worse? She smiled. No, lighter. I laughed. I cried in a parking lot 2 days ago. So? So that doesn't exactly scream lighter. Linda stirred her iced tea. Sometimes people look lighter because they finally put something heavy down. I thought about that all afternoon. The following week, Mark came home unusually cheerful. I think we're finally catching a break. Business? And the wedding? What about it? Everything seems to be getting back on track. I almost asked how he knew. Instead, I simply nodded. He still believed everything magically worked itself out. Someone always paid. Someone always fixed it. That someone had usually been me. Friday morning brought another email, this time from the wedding planner. Subject line: updated vendor payment. Summary. Normally I would have opened it immediately. Instead, I closed my laptop and went outside. It was one of those perfect Indiana fall mornings. The maple trees had started turning. A neighbor walked his golden retriever. Someone farther down the block was blowing leaves. Ordinary life, peaceful. I realized I'd spent nearly a year thinking about centerpieces, seating charts, rehearsal dinners, welcome bags, and floral colors. None of those things had ever belonged to me. I went inside almost an hour later and finally opened the email. There were dozens of attachments, vendor schedules, updated timelines, outstanding balances. I noticed something interesting. The planner had accidentally sent the email to everyone involved. Not just Olivia, not just me, Ryan, Mark, the caterer, the florist, the photographer, everyone. One spreadsheet caught my eye. Across the top was a simple heading: Primary Client. Below it, every single vendor listed exactly the same name: Claire Bennett. I stared at the screen. Then my phone buzzed. Ryan, not a text. A phone call. I let it ring twice before answering. Hi, Ryan. His voice sounded confused. Claire? Yes? I think there has to be some kind of mistake. What kind of mistake? I just got the payment summary. So did I. There was a long pause. Then he asked the question I'd been wondering when someone would finally ask. Why is your name on every single contract? I looked out the kitchen window toward the backyard. The wind had started knocking yellow leaves off the old oak tree, one by one, quietly. I think, I said softly, that's a conversation you should have with Olivia. Silence. Then, Claire, I have to go. I ended the call. For the first time since that awful dinner, someone had finally started asking the right questions. Ryan didn't call again that afternoon. Neither did Olivia. For about 6 glorious hours, my phone stayed completely silent. I baked banana bread, not because anyone had asked me to, just because my kitchen suddenly felt like mine again. There's something oddly comforting about measuring flour when your life feels out of balance. Flour doesn't argue with you. Butter doesn't pretend not to know you. If you follow the recipe, it usually returns the favor. Around 4 o'clock, Mark came home much earlier than usual. The moment I heard the garage door, I knew something had happened. He walked into the kitchen looking like he'd aged 5 years since breakfast. Ryan called me. I sliced the banana bread. How is he? Confused. I imagine he would be. Mark rubbed both hands over his face. He thinks the wedding planner made some kind of mistake. I set 2 slices on a plate. Did you tell him the truth? He looked away. I told him we'd talk. That's not what I asked. He sighed. No. I wasn't angry anymore. Disappointed, yes. But anger takes energy. Disappointment simply settles into your bones. You should have, I said. He wouldn't understand. I almost laughed. Mark, he's 33 years old, not 3. He leaned against the counter. I was trying to protect Olivia. I looked him straight in the eye. And who was protecting me? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. That silence answered my question better than words ever could. The next morning, I drove to Indianapolis to return a library book I'd borrowed from the downtown branch. On the way home, my phone rang. Ryan. This time, I answered immediately. Hi. Claire, would you mind meeting me? For what? I don't think anyone's telling me the whole story." There was something different in his voice. Not accusation, not anger, just genuine confusion. We agreed to meet at a small coffee shop near Monument Circle. He was already there when I arrived. He stood as I walked in, always polite, always respectful. That made what happened next even harder. After we'd ordered coffee, he slid a folder across the table. "I've been visiting vendors." I looked at the folder but didn't touch it. "The florist. The photographer. The caterer." He gave a tired little smile. "They all know you." I nodded. "They kept thanking me." Another nod. "Claire." He looked genuinely shaken. "I thought Mark was paying for this wedding." "He wanted to. But he didn't." "No," Ryan leaned back in his chair. "I don't understand." For a long moment I watched people walking outside. Office workers carrying sandwiches, a couple holding hands, a father pushing a stroller while talking into an earbud. Ordinary people, living ordinary lives. "I never intended for you to find out this way." "Then tell me the right way." So I did. Not dramatically, not as a speech, just honestly. I told him about Mark's struggling business, about the unpaid deposits, about quietly covering expenses because I loved my family. I never once used the word sacrifice. People who talk about their sacrifices usually expect applause. I didn't. Ryan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he whispered, "She never told me." "I know." I asked Olivia how they suddenly afforded everything. What did she say? She said her dad had planned well. I smiled sadly. "Your future father-in-law is many wonderful things. But wealthy isn't one of them." Ryan stared into his coffee. "I feel sick." "You don't need to." "No," he shook his head. "I really do." That afternoon, Ryan confronted Olivia. I wasn't there. I learned what happened later. Apparently, he asked one simple question. "Why is Claire paying for our wedding?" Olivia didn't panic. She rolled her eyes. "Because she wanted to." Ryan asked, "Did you ever thank her?" Olivia shrugged. "She likes helping." "That's not what I asked." Another shrug. Ryan later told me that bothered him more than anything else. Not the money, the indifference. 3 days later, my phone rang again. "Elaine." "I thought you should know." Her voice sounded almost apologetic. "We have another bride." I smiled. I figured someone eventually would. "She fell in love with the gown." I closed my eyes. For a second, I pictured Olivia standing in front of that mirror, spinning, laughing, looking happier than I'd seen her in years. Then another memory replaced it. 15-year-old Olivia with pneumonia. Mark was stuck overnight on an emergency commercial repair. I spent 2 nights sleeping in a hospital recliner beside her. Every few hours she'd wake up coughing. I'd hand her water, rub her back, tell her another terrible joke until she smiled. She'd called me Claire. Not mom, not stepmom, just Claire. And honestly, that had been enough. Back then, Elaine interrupted my thoughts. "Claire, I'm here. The contract allows us to release the gown." "I know." I wanted to hear it from you. There it was, the moment I'd been dreading. Because despite everything, I still loved the young woman who had humiliated me. Not because she deserved it, because love doesn't disappear on command. I sat quietly for almost a full minute. Then I said, "Go ahead." Elaine didn't celebrate, didn't congratulate me. She simply answered, "I'll take care of it." Saturday morning arrived, Olivia's final fitting. Around noon, Linda called. "I just heard something." "Oh?" "The bridal boutique." I smiled faintly. News travels fast. Apparently, Olivia had a complete meltdown. "That sounded about right," Linda continued. One of my neighbors was there with her daughter. They said everyone in the store stopped what they were doing. I could almost picture it, Olivia storming through the boutique. "Where's my dress?" Elaine, calm as ever. "The gown is no longer available." "What do you mean?" "The purchase was never completed. Claire did this." Then, according to Linda's neighbor, Elaine folded her hands and quietly said, "No, Olivia." Claire simply stopped paying for a wedding she wasn't invited to attend. Silence. The kind that hurts. That evening, Ryan went back through months of wedding emails. Most people don't realize computers remember almost everything. Old attachments, shared folders, archived drafts. Wedding planning had become so complicated that Olivia created a shared online folder months earlier. Ryan opened it, looking for contracts. Instead, he found screenshots, group chats, conversations Olivia had forgotten to delete. One message from a bridesmaid made him stop scrolling. "Do you seriously think Claire will keep paying?" Olivia had replied only seconds later. "Relax. She's basically our ATM." Ryan read it once. Then again, then a third time. Later he told me something I'll never forget. "It wasn't the money that broke my heart. It was realizing she'd been laughing at your kindness." He closed the laptop, picked up his car keys, and drove straight to Olivia's apartment. Neither of them knew. Their wedding would never happen. Ryan didn't call me after he left Olivia's apartment. He didn't have to. The silence told me enough. When people finally see someone for who they really are, they usually don't know what to say. They just go quiet. I recognized that kind of silence. I'd lived in it for years. Monday morning, I was watering the mums on my front porch when Mark's truck pulled into the driveway. He usually left for work before sunrise. This time, it was barely 8. He climbed out looking exhausted. "Can we talk?" I set the watering can down. "We've been talking." "No," he shook his head. "We've been avoiding the real conversation." That, at least, was honest. We sat on the porch with 2 mugs of coffee between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Finally, Mark sighed. "Ryan knows. I figured." "He came over Saturday night." "And?" He asked me one question. Mark swallowed hard. "Did Claire really pay for almost everything?" "What did you tell him?" I told him yes. I waited. He asked why. "And?" I said, "Because I couldn't." His shoulders slumped. "My business has been hanging by a thread for almost a year." I looked at him quietly. "You should have trusted me enough to tell me." "I was ashamed. I know. And every time you paid another invoice," his voice cracked, "it became harder to admit how bad things really were." That, strangely enough, I believed, pride has ruined more marriages than money ever has, but pride wasn't what destroyed ours. Silence did. Mark stared into his coffee. "I kept thinking I'd fix everything before anyone found out." "You mean before I found out?" He nodded. "I never wanted you carrying this." I gave him a sad smile. "You let me carry all of it. The money, the planning, the pretending, the heartbreak, all while convincing yourself you were protecting me." Neither of us said another word. Some truths don't need explaining. Around lunchtime, Ryan called. "Claire, do you have a minute?" "Of course." "I wanted you to hear this from me before anyone else does." My stomach tightened. "I'm calling off the wedding." I closed my eyes, not because I was happy, because I suddenly felt incredibly sad. "Are you sure?" "I wish I weren't." His voice sounded tired. I spent the last 2 days hoping there was some explanation. "There wasn't?" "There was." He laughed once, a hollow laugh. It just wasn't one I could live with. I didn't interrupt. I asked Olivia why she excluded you. "What did she say?" "She said, He hesitated. "You're not really family. Dad married her when I was already grown." I waited. Then I asked why she accepted your money. What did she say? Ryan let out a slow breath. "Because she offered." Silence settled between us. Finally, he whispered. I realized she wasn't embarrassed. She felt entitled. Later that afternoon, I learned Ryan had asked Olivia one final question. Not about the dress, not about the money, about me. "Did Claire ever make you feel unwelcome?" Olivia answered immediately. "No." "Did she ever try replacing your mom?" "No." "Did she ever ask for anything in return?" "No." Ryan looked at her for several seconds, then quietly said, "So you hurt the one person who never hurt you." According to Olivia's maid of honor, she became furious. She accused Ryan of choosing me over her. She insisted everyone was overreacting. "It's just one wedding." Ryan answered with words that would eventually spread through both families. "No, it's about character." The rehearsal dinner was supposed to take place Thursday evening at a private room inside Matt the Miller's tavern. Reservations had been made months earlier. Most of both families were already there when Ryan arrived. Olivia was wearing a white cocktail dress. She looked beautiful, completely confident, certain the weekend would unfold exactly as she'd imagined. She smiled when Ryan walked in. He didn't smile back. Mark told me later the entire room felt different the moment Ryan entered. He wasn't angry, he wasn't emotional, he looked peaceful, which is somehow far more frightening. He waited until everyone had finished talking. Then he stood. "I'd like everyone's attention." The room became quiet. Ryan looked at Olivia. "I've spent the last week learning things I wish I'd known months ago." Olivia crossed her arms. "What is this?" He continued calmly. "I've met the florist, the caterer, the photographer, the wedding planner." Every head slowly turned toward Olivia. Ryan reached into his jacket. He didn't pull out the engagement ring. He pulled out copies of invoices. "I thought my future father-in-law had paid for this wedding." He looked toward Mark. "I was wrong." Then he looked toward the rest of the family. "The person who made this wedding possible." He paused. Checked was the one person who wasn't invited to attend. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Ryan folded the papers carefully. I asked myself one question. If someone can accept years of kindness, then publicly humiliate the person providing it, what happens after we're married? Olivia finally stood. "This is ridiculous." "No," Ryan answered. "It's overdue." She reached for his arm. He stepped back. Very gently, not dramatically, just one step. "I can't marry someone who mistakes generosity for weakness." He slipped the engagement ring from his finger, walked to the table, placed it beside Olivia's water glass. No shouting, no accusations, no insults, only one final sentence. "I hope someday you become the woman Claire believed you already were." Then he walked out. No one followed him. The room remained completely still. Mark later told me he had never experienced silence like that, not after funerals, not after business failures, not even after his first wife died. Because this silence carried something heavier than grief. It carried recognition. Every person in that room suddenly understood what had really happened. It had never been about a wedding dress, or $11,200, or even an invitation. It was about taking love from someone for years, while refusing to give them the smallest measure of respect. Later that evening, Mark came home. He found me reading on the back porch. "I think I lost my daughter today." I closed my book. "No, you lost her a long time ago. You just didn't notice." He sat beside me. For the first time in our marriage, he cried. Not because Ryan ended the engagement. Not because the wedding collapsed, because he finally realized that every time he chose the easier conversation, he had quietly abandoned the harder, more important one. And that person had been me. The wedding was supposed to happen that Saturday. Instead, I spent the morning planting tulip bulbs in my backyard. Life has a funny way of insisting that seasons keep changing whether your heart is ready or not. I knelt in the soft Indiana soil with a pair of gardening gloves that had seen better days. The air smelled like damp leaves and fresh earth. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower hummed. It was the kind of ordinary Saturday I'd almost forgotten existed. No seating charts. No vendor calls, no last-minute emergencies. Just me. For the first time in months, nobody needed me to rescue them. I wasn't sure whether to feel relieved or lonely. Maybe both. About 11 o'clock, my phone buzzed. Mark. I let it ring. Then voicemail. 5 minutes later, another call. This time I answered. Hi. His voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. Can I come over? You already have a key. I don't think I should use it anymore. That sentence told me everything. Come by. He arrived carrying a cardboard bakery box from Long's Bakery in Indianapolis. My favorite glazed donuts. A peace offering. Typical Mark. He'd never been very good with words. We sat on the patio while the coffee brewed. Neither of us touched the donuts. I talked to Olivia. I nodded. How is she? Angry. I'm not surprised. Mostly at me. That caught my attention. For what? He looked down at his hands. She asked why I didn't stop you. I almost smiled. I didn't do anything to stop. I know. He swallowed hard. I told her the truth. What truth? That none of this would have happened if I'd spoken up months ago. The breeze rustled the maple tree above us. Mark stared out at the yard. I kept thinking keeping the peace meant staying quiet. I looked at him. And now? I finally understand. He gave a sad little laugh. Silence doesn't keep peace. It protects whoever's willing to make the most noise. I didn't answer, because he was right, and because I'd spent years helping create that silence myself. Every time I'd ignored a rude comment, every time I'd fixed another problem without saying how exhausted I felt, every time I'd accepted less than respect because I didn't want anyone to be uncomfortable. I hadn't caused Olivia's behavior, but I'd quietly taught everyone, including myself, that my feelings could always wait. 2 weeks later, Mark asked if I'd go to marriage counseling. I said yes. Not because I thought it would save our marriage, because after 8 years together, I believed we owed each other an honest ending. Dr. Melissa Harding had an office overlooking the White River. She listened far more than she spoke. During our third session, she asked Mark one simple question. When Claire left that restaurant, why didn't you follow her? Mark didn't answer for nearly a minute. Finally, he whispered, because I knew Olivia was wrong. Dr. Harding waited. And? I was afraid if I challenged her, his voice broke, I'd lose my daughter. The room stayed quiet. Then I heard myself say something I'd never planned to say. You lost your wife instead. There wasn't any anger left in my voice. Just truth. Sometimes truth is the gentlest thing in the room. Sometimes it's the heaviest. We divorced 4 months later. No courtroom drama. No shouting across attorneys' tables. Just 2 people signing papers neither of us had imagined we'd ever sign. Outside the courthouse, Mark asked if he could hug me. I nodded. He held on for a few seconds. I'm sorry. I know. I really did love you. I know that too. The hardest part wasn't believing he loved me, The hardest part was accepting that love by itself isn't enough. Not if it never grows into courage. We wished each other well. Then walked toward separate parking lots. I cried all the way home, not because I regretted leaving, because I was mourning the marriage I thought we were building. There's a difference. I didn't understand that until much later. Ryan wrote me a letter about a month after the divorce. An actual handwritten letter. Who does that anymore? Apparently decent people still do. Inside was a single page. The last paragraph read, "Claire, I don't think I'll ever be able to repay your kindness. And I know that's not what you wanted anyway. Thank you for showing me what quiet integrity looks like. You probably saved me from building a life on a foundation that couldn't hold." I folded the letter and tucked it inside my favorite cookbook. Not because I planned to read it every day, because I wanted to remember that kindness isn't wasted just because the wrong person refuses to appreciate it. Sometimes it reaches someone else entirely. Winter arrived. Then spring. One afternoon, Elaine called. "Busy Friday night?" "I don't think so." "My boutique sponsors a charity gala every year." "For what?" "Widows, divorce recovery groups, women rebuilding their lives." I smiled. "You planned this, didn't you?" "I've been running a bridal boutique for 30 years. She laughed. "I've learned weddings aren't the only beginnings worth celebrating." So I went. Not in a designer gown, not in anything that would make people stop and stare. Just a navy blue dress I'd owned for years, comfortable shoes, simple pearl earrings David had given me on our 20th anniversary. For the first time in a very long while, I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I spent most of the evening talking with women I'd never met before. One had started a bakery at 62 after her husband passed away. Another had gone back to college at 58. A third had taken her first solo vacation because, in her words, I got tired of waiting for someone else to live my life. We laughed, shared stories, compared aching knees and favorite slow cookers. It was the most fun I'd had in years. As I was leaving, Elaine hugged me. "You know..." "What?" "You look different." I grinned. "Lighter?" She laughed. "Exactly." A few weeks later, I was walking through downtown Carmel after visiting the Saturday farmers market. I bought fresh flowers. Not because someone was coming over, not because it was a holiday, simply because yellow tulips made me smile. As I carried them back to my car, I caught my reflection in a storefront window. I stopped for a moment. The woman looking back at me wasn't younger. She still had silver threads in her hair. She still had laugh lines around her eyes. She still missed David sometimes. She still felt sad about Mark. But she also looked peaceful, finally. It took me 56 years to understand something I wish I'd learned much sooner. Love should never require you to audition for a place in someone's family, and generosity should never become the price of belonging. The day I stopped paying for acceptance, I finally started respecting myself. If you've ever loved people who took your kindness for granted, I hope you remember this. Setting a boundary doesn't make you cruel. Sometimes it's the kindest thing you can do, for yourself, and eventually for everyone else. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've lived through something similar, I'd truly love to hear about it in the comments. Sometimes knowing we're not alone is the first step toward healing.